Good afternoon and welcome to today's Wednesday webcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Peter Brabeck, Chairman of the Board of Nestlé, Vice Chairman of both L'Oréal and Credit Suisse Group, Foundation Board Member of the World Economic Forum, and Chairman of the 2030 Water Resources Group. Mr. Brabeck, many thanks indeed for being with us today. You're here to talk to IMD's alumni about water scarcity, an issue that you believe, if unaddressed, will lead to a major global crisis. Can you tell us more?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure coming back to IMD. As you know, I have been very close to IMD for many, many years, even many years as a member of the Foundation Board, so I'm always happy to be back. Yes, the water issue is a very important issue, and I think it's an issue which is still not really understood by most people. We are talking about energy crisis. We have proven reserves today for 120 years of oil, proven. They are much more available. We have proven reserves for gas for 240 years. We have proven reserves for coal 550 years. We are running out of water today. So I'm saying we are going to run out of water long before we are running out of all the fossil energy currents. And yet, we are treating water like it was something that was available whenever, wherever, and however we wanted. And that's not true.
And why do you think that is? Why do people see water as a free resource, freely available? What's the mindset that gets us to that point?
Well, because here in Europe, of course, or in the northern part of Europe, like today when it is raining and snowing, it's very difficult to understand that water is a limited resource. We have almost too much of it. But if you go south of the Alps or south of the Pyrenees, it's already started to look quite different. Okay? Now, but when you really go into the big agricultural centers, if you go to the Midwest of the USA, if you go to the Punjab in India, if you go to Pakistan, if you go to China, if you go to Australia, those are the corn chambers of the world. Well, there the situation is very different. And what happens is that as we have been overusing the water, available water, over the last couple of years, we have been doing it by using the water which is reserved for the environment. So what we are doing is, we are taking away the waters of the Great Lakes. Take the Aral Lake. 15 years ago, the port cities were still on the water level. Today you can drive 100 kilometers to get to the water. If you take about the Lake of Chad, 25,000 square kilometer of water 15 years ago, today 2,500 square kilometer. That's where we are taking off. If you look at the subterranean aquifer, they are falling in the Punjab by 1.5 meter every single year until they get down to the level where we have only arsenically poisoned water. Those are the issues, but you don't see them. And that's why the consciousness of them is so difficult to create.
Now, you're chairman of the Water Resources Group, which is focusing on exactly this issue. Can you tell us more about that group? What are the aims and objectives of that group, and what are you doing to publicize and bring this issue to a wider population?
Yeah, it's about now 5-6 years ago that I asked one day Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum whether he would allow me to have a small session on water. And he said, why do you want to talk about water? Everybody was talking about CO2 and climate change and I don't know what, and earth warming and things like this. I said, look, I think our real problem is much more urgent. It's on the water side. Just give me 1 room and 1 hour. Well, finally I got it. I got my room. We were 10 people in the room. And we talked about this, and those 10 people were very much interested in the same subject. They had already seen the reality behind the water. And we started at this meeting a small group of people who had a common interest. There were some multinational companies, there were some NGOs, and there was above all IFC, the International Finance Company from the World Bank. And we created the first small group. We then asked, which was was no association, it was just a group of interested persons. We then asked McKinsey to help us and to give us the factual background of our work. And we created this water resource group. And McKinsey made the first study that we published afterwards, which proved what we were thinking and what we were feeling, namely that we are already using 10% more water than what is naturally sustainable in the long term. Now, together with this and with finding solutions in order to rebalance the demand and supply side, we published the first report. Now, out of this report, more interest was created. We got then more, even governments being interested in this, and we created the World Economic Forum Water Resource Group. Klaus Schwab allowed us for 2 years to house this group into the World Economic Forum. But he said very clearly, 2 years. So in the next while we are starting to work with governments and the projects in different 5 countries, we'll talk about that, we had to look for a new house. And we found a new house in the World Bank. And today the Water Resource Group is a public-private partnership which is housed inside of the World Bank and in the IFC. So that's what we are today, a nice group of multinational companies, NGOs, development banks, development agencies, including, by the way, the Swiss development agencies and development banks. Those group is today working together in this water resource group.
So you talked there about this being a public-private partnership. When I looked at some of the material and the reports that the World Resources Group are publishing, this notion of intersection seems to be very important. The intersection between public and private, the intersection between government and business, between business and society. How important is that to rebalancing, to take your phrase, to rebalancing the supply and demand? How important are these intersections? And typically, in your experience, where is the friction in those intersections?
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that any solution can only go if you really bring all the stakeholders together. And one of the fundamentals of the Water Resource Group is that we are not going to substitute ourselves for the main responsibility for water, which will always stay with the government. So we are only working if government is convinced that they have an issue, if they are willing to do something about it, and this willingness has to be expressed first by the implication of the Prime Minister or the President. Secondly, there has to be nominated somebody who is a coordinator, can be one minister, because in most of the cases, water is being handled by 24 different state agencies, So we cannot coordinate this. Somebody has to coordinate. And thirdly, the government also has to be willing to invest money. Because at the Water Resource Group, we are not a funding agency. We don't have this money. What we can bring is basically, what we are bringing is know-how, is experience from other similar situations, and we have a certain project management. And I would say my role perhaps to assure that we have an entrepreneurial style in such a public-private partnership. That's why some people say this is almost like a breakthrough public-private partnership. And that's exactly what we want. That's the way we work. Why do I believe it is so important? Well, most of those cases, in order to find the balance between demand and supply, you need to come to political decision makings. And those one, as I said, can only be done by committed governments. They cannot be done by any public-private partnership and shouldn't be done because this is political domain.
So when the Water Resources Group knocks on the door of the Prime Minister or the President or whoever the leader of a particular country might be, what is the range of reactions that you're met with?
Well, first of all, I'm not knocking at no door because we wait until they knock on our door. Okay? That's the first thing. It's one part of the way how we are acting. Makes us different to quite a lot of other people. And I must say I'm very happy to say that we are not lacking of customers. And that's the first thing. So if they come to us, they hear from us, for example, we report back every year in Davos, together with the governments that are involved today, we report back to the audience, to the public, what we have been doing, what we have been achieving, what our projects are, what have been the results. All the results are published on the internet And we have established a catalog where we have all the results that we are learning from the things are publicly available for anybody. So we are very transparent, very open about this thing. Now, by listening to these presentations, there are governments who said, well, perhaps something that I might be looking into, and that's exactly the way how we are moving. So we let it, we are driven when the government is committed, otherwise we are not working.
So when I looked in some of the reports from the Water Resources Group, there were 9 or 10 best practices story. 4 of them seem to be coming from India. So what does the rest of the world have to learn from India? And India is obviously a big concern for Nestlé. You've been there for over 100 years. You've invested a lot of money recently in factory extension plants, I think over 120 million francs in the last 3 years. Can you tell us about what can we learn from India and what is Nestlé's role there?
Well, I would say we have quite a lot of results from India because it was one of the first countries we worked with. Now, India is very special. I mean, India, what most people don't realize, is the biggest milk producer of the world. And is now on the way to become the biggest meat producer of the world. It is one of the main corn producers, sugar producers, and so on. So agriculture plays an enormous role. The rural population plays an enormous role. There are a big majority living in that. And what you also have in India now, crystallizing out more and more, is a certain conflict between agriculture and industrialization. And you might have seen in the newspaper last year that there was a great plan in order to install one of the most modern automotive factories, and the farmers around just boycotted it. Why? Because the farmers understand very well that such an industry will need quite a lot of water, and they are worried that this water will be taken away from their fields, and therefore they will not have them. So that's the first thing, is this confrontation between industrialization on the one hand and the defense of the agriculture as a backbone for rural life in India. The second one is that in the area where rural development has been very successful, which is in the Punjab, for example, this has been done during the beginning of the Green Revolution by giving to the farmers, free of charge, water pumps, and free of charge the electricity that they need in order to let the pumps run. As a matter of fact, more than 40% of all electricity in the Punjab is just being used in order to have these water pumps going. Now that was about 25 years ago. Water level was 1.5 meter below surface. Well, now we are 105 meter below surface, and now we are starting to get to this aquifer which is contaminated by arsenic, which is coming from the Himalayas. Now suddenly this becomes a big problem, and it's not enough just to give free electricity and free pumping, because what you're pumping starts to get poisoned water. So another big issue, big problem. That's why I think the water issue is more acute in India than perhaps in some other countries. And that's why our first experiences were in India, and quite a lot of the learnings we have is from India. That's the main reason.
There was a very nice turnaround story as well of Cambodia, where over the last number of years they've increased water production level, they've increased the water distribution network. Can you tell us a little bit about the reasons behind that success? How did they achieve that? What obstacles did they have to overcome?
I think that's a very interesting, and I must say there it is not, we have not been participating, but we are using it as an example what one single man can do. I mean, in Cambodia, it was basically in the capital, there was an absolutely disaster on the municipal water supply. Water didn't have any price, nobody paid for anything, and this gentleman was called in and was asked to re-establish a normal water supply situation. And the first thing he did, he looked around and said, where is all this water going? And how can I have funds in order to be able to re-establish a piping system and things like this? Well, he found out that most of the water went, for example, to the military compounds, and they never paid 1 cent about it. And as the militaries didn't pay 1 cent about it, nobody else paid a cent about it. And so he established and said, from now onwards, everybody pays a small amount for the water that it uses. And guess what? The military said, forget about it. And he said, well, then I switch off the water supply. And they said, you wouldn't dare. And he dared. And he switched it off. And he earned so much respect that finally military also agreed that they had to pay. And when the military started to pay, everybody understood that that was the only way. And he reestablished today a water supply system which is the most efficient in the world, together with Singapore. There is a leakage of only 5%. I mean, if you compare, the leakage in London is about 35%. And in Cambodia, they have brought it down to 5%. And we mentioned that because it just shows you that if you have a good water management, you can solve those problems. I mean, those problems that we have today, they're all solvable. But you have to have the will in order to establish a good water management.
So what is the Water Resources Group doing to obviously sharing the best practices stories, like the story in Cambodia? What can you do to move from education to implementation, to really help? So maybe London with its 35% of leaky pipes is maybe less engaged, I don't know, than what's been happening in Cambodia. How can you move from education to implementation, to getting things done?
Well, that brings me to a very, very delicate issue. Most of people are saying there cannot be any steering mechanism which is based on market in the water business, because water is a human right. And I can agree with those people fully. I'm absolutely convinced that the 5 liters of water that we need for hydration and the 25 liters of water that we need for minimum hygiene is a human right. And as a human right, it's a responsibility of each government to assure that people have access to this amount of water. This amount of water, of human right, accounts for 1.5% of the water that we are using as human beings. What I'm saying is that the 98.5% of the water that we are misusing is not a human right. There is no human right for washing my car. There is no human right for filling my swimming pool. There is no human right in order to sprinkle my golf courses. That's not a human right. Okay? So let's concentrate on the 98.5% where we are misusing. And there, the best mechanism that we have in a free market environment is a price.
So pricing regulation, you believe, is the way forward for water management?
Well, I think this is one way. Now, I understand that in some places of this world, this is a little bit difficult. Now, we offer a second one. We offer the water cost curve. So what we are doing is for every water basin of the world, and we have been doing it for 154 water basins of the world, we are establishing cost curves, what it would cost, what are the measurements that we would have to implement in order to balance out the demand and the supply side. In the case of India, for example, where we did it, we came that with a total cost of $5.6 billion per year, you could balance this out. And when we showed them this 5.6 billion, which for the Indian economy is a drop in the ocean, suddenly government and the ministers became interested, because they had thought before that this would be so costly that, as the minister said, anybody in India who would be touching the subject of water would be committing political suicide. So they didn't do anything. Only when we showed them the cost curve, they started to become interested. So we have a second possibility. The third one is what we are doing, for example, at Nestlé. At Nestlé, we have established a shadow price. So we start with 1 franc per cubic meter of water up to 5 francs per cubic meter of water, of a price, depending whether we are in a water-rich and a water-poor environment. But then we establish this cost, which is a shadow cost, in order to see whether economically we can invest into water saving or water efficiency investments. But you need to have a value for this in order to be able to do. So there are 3 different ways how you can do that. And they are not necessarily conflictive with what we have said before, that water is a human right.
So there will be people perhaps watching today. There are plenty of activist groups around who will enjoy making noise for Nestlé and making your life difficult. And even though bottled water is a minute fraction of the water issue that we're talking about today, that can be seen as a lightning rod by some activists. How would you respond to them?
Well, first of all, I would say it might not be seen. It is. I mean, that's where we are being attacked. And I mean, for those who have seen the latest movie that was made, Bottled Life, which is basically a confrontation between the NGO environment and me personally, because the whole movie constantly goes against me. Well, my answer is very simple. The first one is, if we believe that bottled water, or even the interdiction of to sell bottled water would save our problem, well, that would be very easy, but that's not true. We are using 0.0009% of the water withdrawal for human use. So if you would prohibit this one, nothing would change, okay? The film and our adversaries don't want to talk about the real issues. That's the first thing. The second one, which is even much more interesting, I would say, is that if I take a bottle of mineral water, like this one here, okay, and I put in a little bit of sugar and a little bit of some chemicals, suddenly this product is fully accepted by the NGOs. Suddenly it becomes no discussion at all. Now, I still believe, and I'm convinced, that the best hydration remedy that there is in the world is a pure water. So I don't understand how, when you are falsifying pure water, if you're starting to make it worse, then suddenly it becomes acceptable. So it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's emotional, it looks very good, but the reality is, if you look at the facts, it's not an issue.
So those emotional arguments might be directed against you. They might be directed against Nestlé as well. There's obviously a link between water, the production of food, the manufacturing of food. I think if we don't address the water issue, we'll probably go to a global food crisis as well. Again, activists might look at that and say, this is not just enlightened self-interest for Nestlé. This is about Nestlé's core business. How would you respond to them?
Well, I would say you're right. The way I came to water was very simple. We were celebrating the 140 years anniversary, and I was leaning back and I was thinking about what would be the one single issue that could prevent me from achieving the 280 years. And going through the whole exercise, there came out one resource, which was water. Seems easy and clear now, but when I started, there were many other parameters in the things. I came down to water, and then I started to look at the water. It is absolutely true. Nestlé wouldn't have a future if we go into a major water crisis, because first of all, we need water to have consumers, because without water, we wouldn't be able to live. Okay? Secondly, we need water for the hydration and the minimum, what we said before. Thirdly, another fact which has been completely taken or forgotten is we need 1 liter of water to produce 1 calorie that we're eating. So that means that between you and me, living in Europe, we are eating every day 4,500 liters of water. If we were living in Texas, 6,500 liters of water. And if we are living in India as vegetarians, we could bring it down perhaps to 2,500 liters of water. But we need the water in order to be able to live. Okay? Certainly, therefore, all raw materials of Nestlé need water. We need water for our factories, and we need water, in most cases, to prepare our products, because a soluble coffee without water, a soluble milk without water, a Maggi product without water is not a good product. So yes, it is absolutely true. The way I came to the water issue was by looking what was critical for Nestlé. And I don't think that's wrong. Now, how much water are we using? We're very little. When we started to look at this water situation, we needed 4.5 liters of water to produce $1 of turnover. Now, with all the efficiency measures, we are down at 1.5 liters of water for $1 of turnover. You look into any other industry, and you will see that they will need 200 liters, 400 liters in order to produce 1 liter. And if you go into the other industry, which is biodiesel, where I'm just coming from Brussels, talking about this issue, you need 9,100 liters of water to produce 1 liter of biodiesel. So from 1.5 liters of water to 9,100, I know where I have to start to work in order to get this problem under control.
And what has Nestlé done to make such a dramatic reduction from 4.5 litres to 1.5 litres?
I think one of the most important things was to give value to water, as I said before. We introduced the shadow pricing. Because once you have a shadow price, you then can justify the investments which are necessary in order to increase your water efficiency. If the water has zero value, there is no economic justification for any investment. And that's basically the most important part. Give a value to water, whatever the value is, but give one. How can anybody explain to me that we are willing to spend 9,100 liters of water to produce 1 liter of biodiesel if we would give any value to water? Give him 1 cent. You wouldn't do biodiesel what we are doing.
Now, you touched earlier on India and vegetarianism. I read in an article or a quote from you about this tenfold multiplier effect, that it takes 10 times as much water to create a calorie of meat than it does of grain or vegetable, 10 times as much feed, 10 times as much land.
If the rest of the world would be eating like the Americans and the Europeans are eating today, we wouldn't have enough water today to produce the amount of food that we need. Okay? We can only eat so much meat today in Europe and in the USA because the others are not eating. As a matter of fact, if you take the developing countries, their consumption is 68 grams of meat, which is about a sixth of that what we are eating here. If you would forecast that they all will be eating like we are eating today, there is not sufficient food production. This is one of the main issues of the increasing demand, over-proportional demand that we have on land and that we have also in food production, is a meat consumption. And I don't understand how we are going to tell the Chinese, who have been eating up to perhaps 15 years ago a bowl of rice, that they don't have the right to have a little bit of a chicken or a meat or something on top of it. I don't think they will accept that. So absolutely true. I mean, the question how we are going to feed ourselves is going to be a very important one.
And with the population targeting now for 9 billion people by the middle of the century, do we have enough to feed the planet?
We have enough to feed, but we don't have enough to feed it the way we are using it now. I mean, let's face another part of it. About 40% of all the food produced in developing countries is lost because we don't have sufficient infrastructure. And about 30 to 40% of all the food which is being bought in the developed countries, we don't use it because we throw it away. Okay? I mean, that's about the amount. So 40% of the total food production is being lost either lack of infrastructure or just because we couldn't care, or because we are buying big amounts of quantities, which then afterwards shelf life comes and we throw them away. Or we have so big portions in the restaurant that most of these things is just being thrown away. So those are the issues on waste. It's very interesting. This waste alone accounts for about 1,500 cubic kilometer of water that is thrown away out of 4,200 that we have available. So just by getting a grip on this one, we would have sufficient in order to feed the world, even if it's 9 billion. So it's not a problem that we cannot grow to 9 billion. And as a matter of fact, we might grow now to 10 billion by the end of the year. We can feed this population, but not the way we do it today.
So if we can be personal for a moment to close up the interview. You touched before on the film that's attacking you personally. You're a tireless ambassador for water. You're investing a lot of time and energy and traveling all around the world. And it's clear from the way you talk today, you're a real believer in this. You have a lot of passion behind that. How do you deal on a personal level with those very emotional and many people would say unfair attacks? How do you deal with that on a personal level?
Well, I think I have learned over the last couple of years not to take those things personally. My good old friend Sean Siegler on the other side of the lake, for example, he says, well, Brabeck is not such a bad person. The problem is that the job he has makes him a bad person. So, I mean, even he recognized that perhaps it's not so personal. You cannot take this personal. If you want to stand it for something that you are convinced about, and I'm convinced about because I have looked into this seriously, I have worked it through, I know the facts, I know the base, I know what I'm talking about. So those people who are attacking me, in most of the cases, don't know the fact, don't want to know the fact, and they just want to live what they have in their imagination. And the only way how you can respond is to come back with facts, and then the discussion becomes again less emotional. There will always be emotion, but I think facts at the end of the day is the one that have to drive to the solutions that we need.
So as a final question today, you've talked about your own personal belief. We've seen the impact of one gentleman in Cambodia who's made an enormous difference. What is the closing message that you would like to leave to our viewers, individuals like myself watching around the world? What is the message that you want to leave for individuals on what we can and should be doing to avoid the crises that we've been talking about?
Well, let me give you one example. I mean, one of the biggest fallacies that we have been doing was this policy of biofuel. And biofuel was a political response to several issues. Most of them had to do with the energy problem that we had. Okay? They did not consider the huge impact that biofuel would have on the food supply and food security, nor on the water issue, much less. Now, 5 years ago, in Europe, we had the target of 20% substitution of the energy by biofuel. We have been starting to talk about this subject, openly showing the figures that we have, explaining to the people that it is absolutely ridiculous because the energy market is 20 times as big as the food market. So if you want to replace 20% of a 20 times bigger market with a smaller one, you have to triple the smaller one. That alone would have meant that we have to triple the food production, which is absolutely impossible. Again, facts were not on the table. Emotions were on the table at that point of time. Well, I'm coming back today. I was invited to speak to the European Parliament now. And guess what? At least we have achieved that the new targets will be, if at all, 5%. And not 20%. So I think that is a good proof that if you really are convinced, and again, if you have the facts on the table, you can make an impact. And I think each one of us can make an impact. You don't have to be only an NGO. Of course, NGOs also make an impact, and many of them make a very good impact. But I think also we, as entrepreneurs, as CEOs, or as chairmen, we can engage ourselves and we can make an impact. I am absolutely convinced of this, and I think it is necessary that we are doing those things if we want to help to shape the future of this world.
Mr. Brabeck, thank you very much for sharing your energy and your passion and your commitment, and for sharing your time with us here at IMD, with the Corporate Learning Network, with the IMD alumni community. We really appreciate that. Thank you ever so much.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to today's webcast. If you'd like more information on the full range of services that are available from the Corporate Learning Network, just go to our website, www.imd.org/CLN.